Now I'd like to invite Dr. Furukawa for his comments. About 10 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very nice to see you, Marcus, once again. I'm honored to make a comment. Marcus-san's remark about complex humanitarian emergency, which is increasingly politically determined, leads me to recall one of my experience 2 years ago when I was working for an NGO, non-governmental organization in Vienna. As you may recall, it was during the Corona pandemic, and at that time, North Korea continued to not accept the offer from WHO to receive the vaccines for Corona. And I was part of the effort of this Vienna-based NGO to investigate what are the problems in the North Korea's decision-making process, and is there any way that we can do to facilitate understanding of North Korea's about vaccines, medical countermeasures, or the virus itself. The public health authority or expert within the WHO system, he has been long for years dealing with North Korea. He went to North Korea quite some time, several times. He said that the North Korean public health authorities based in Geneva, they are very capable and very well informed, and they know what to do. But the problem was not about the lack of North Korea's lack of understanding about scientific issues, but it was more about the lack of political will to take the risk about the side effect of the vaccines. At that time, just in the spring of 2021, as I recall, the AstraZeneca vaccines had a side effect as it became global news, and that completely frozen the North Korea's interest to receive vaccines through WHO. Several months afterward, international public health community accumulated sufficient, reasonable amount of information about side effect of AstraZeneca vaccines. Who would be the high risk people to take this vaccine, and who should avoid taking these vaccines. But and AstraZeneca vaccine, as everyone knows, many people around the world have been taking, but not North Korea. No one in the public in the line of decision-making process leading up to Pyongyang wanted to take the risk, and that led to the almost quite long-term rejection of North Korea to accept the vaccines, which led to the long-term border closure of North Korea, which led to the food insecurity situation, as stated by Dr. Marcus NOLAND presentation. I think when we look at the North Korea's future projection of the future direction, we should keep in mind two factors. One is the control versus reform, and second is resource allocation between civilian and also military sectors. Over the past few years, there have been an undeniable trend of greater concentration, of greater control of economic activities during the pandemic. The issue for the North Korea, particularly when closing a border, was shifted away from making more and more profit toward how to allocate a limited amount of resources to achieve specific policy objectives. as defined by the Workers' Party of Korea. Now, the latest speech by Mr. Kim Jong-un in the Supreme People's Assembly just 2 days ago appears to point to this kind of reversion to the former efforts to reform what the North Korea coined as the North Korea style of economic reform. And as Mr. NOLAND has stated, the reform in terms of North Korea is the definition is far different from our definition. It's more of an improvement of some procedures or some systems, in my view. This kind of effort may continue, but is North Korea really willing to take on more larger reformative actions? In this regard, I think we need to look at a larger picture of North Korea's, the direction of North Korea's national strategy or external strategy. Since last year, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine, the North Korea's, it appears to me that North Korea's grand strategy, national strategy, has changed from what it used to be. Since the end of the Cold War, the North Korea's national strategy had two pillars. One is economic reform, and to achieve so, the another pillar is normalization of the relationship with the United States. However, by examining the statements coming by Mr. Kim Jong-un and other deeper propaganda media or leaders, especially since last year, the emphasis on the North Korea's confidence that they saved their national economy even despite the hardship. And even during the border closure, without any help from, not to mention US, but also many other countries, they seem to feel that they did it. They were able to do it. They became more confident about their ability to carry out the economic policies in a self-reliance way. The relative weight of the United States, the value of United States for the North Korean economic reform appears to have diminished. And also, especially since last year, the China and Russia issued a joint statement on February 4th last year, in which they declared very clearly and jointly about their pursuit for multipolar world, and the U.S. hegemony should be terminated or expelled. North Korea began to use same terminology in line with those China-Russia joint statement. It appears to me that this long-term national grand strategy of North Korea to pursue the two pillars, economic reform and also normalization of relation with the U.S., seems to have been, at least for now, suspended or possibly abandoned and shifting more drastically to rely on China and Russia. If this is the case, and in fact, North Korea's nuclear posture is currently shaped in such a way as to enable the country to obtain war-fighting capabilities vis-a-vis South Korea and the United States, in addition to the traditional deterrence posture. This requires a considerable amount of state resources to continue to modernize their war-fighting capabilities. Military sectors will continue to consume significant amount of resources. Now the question for Kim Jong will be, can he secure sufficient resources, even if he wants to revert to the previous course of actions to reform or improvement of economy? Does he have resources? Cyber attack is an emerging new industry for North Korea to earn foreign currency. But are they going to facilitate any stress, internal stress on North Korea's efforts to liberalize or deregulate some procedures or systems under the tight control by the party? There seems to be a very big question. The U.S. Department of Agriculture published this year's report at the end of August, which say that North Korea this year has been enjoying favorable conditions for harvesting grains this year. Nevertheless, food shortage appears to be clearly a big issue, continue to be a big issue in North Korea. It's not only about the natural conditions, but certainly systemic problem, as described by Dr. NOLAND. I'll stop my remark here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Furukawa. Dr. Noland, would you like to respond to some of the comments made by Dr. Furukawa now, before we open up the floor for Q&A?
Well, I'm largely, if not completely, in agreement with his comments. I think the basic issue, and it's both a political and even a moral or ethical conundrum that we face, is that we're dealing with a government whose values are simply orthogonal to ours. And what kind of leverage does the outside world have to get the North Koreans to act better, whether it be with regard to nuclear weapons or missiles, or whether it is with regard to the food economy? It's a situation where we almost care more about the North Korean people than they do. I mean, some people argue that we are now in this very odd situation in which we believe that there is hunger in North Korea, yet we're imposing economic sanctions on the country. So maybe we should just get rid of sanctions because there's hungry people. Well, the problem is that getting rid of sanctions will allow the North Korean economy to operate more efficiently. But given the preferences of the regime, it's not at all clear that that's going to go into greater food imports or certainly food going to the most needy people. Rather, it may go to further military modernization. And don't people in Japan and South Korea and the United States have a right to personal security, right, against a sort of belligerent state? So I think that the core of this issue, whether it be on the food economy issues that I've emphasized or the nuclear issues that Professor Furukawa spent so much time on, is how does one deal with a regime that appears basically unaccountable?
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have several questions, and the first question is very much related to what Dr. Nolan just said. Right, let's see. Oh, sorry. I just, stopping food exports to North Korea doesn't seem to work. But what kind of, say, embargo, I guess, in what kind of products, right, or maybe even products or non-visible kind of products. What kind of embargo would you think would be effective against North Korea?
Well, I'll start off, but I would also like to hear what Dr. Furukawa says, because he actually has experience on the UN's panel of experts, observing the whole sanctions regime. So sanctions aren't working. In the sense that the thing that affected North Korea's trade was the border closure. They did to themselves what we hadn't been able to do, which was cut them off from international trade. But under the current political situation in 2023, there's just too much enablement by Russia and China. I mean, Russia is clearly violating the sanctions in that they are importing arms from North Korea that were banned in one of the earliest, or not the earliest, sanction resolution passed by the UN on this issue. So sanctions aren't working. I'm not sure how you can make them more effective if the Russians and the Chinese are not interested in enforcement. So I would think what you would want to do is focus on cybercrime and focus on cryptocurrency laundering. That's going to do more to deny the North Koreans revenue to support the military system than broadening sanctions on traded goods, because China and Russia simply will not enforce. And the flip side of that is, to think about the humanitarian aspect of it, is there are probably reforms that we could do and that we are doing to the existing sanctions regime so that it does not have such an impact on purely humanitarian goods. We should make it easier for relief agencies to get food and other sorts of necessary medical goods, for example, into North Korea. So we should try to make more clear in the sanctions regime what is allowed and what is not. But the basic point is now, I think we have to focus on cyber and cryptocurrencies, because trying to tighten up goods trade sanctions just won't work under the current political system or circumstances.
Before I ask Dr. Furukawa, are there effective ways or measures to deal with this, cyber attacks and cryptocurrency problem?
Again, I would be interested in hearing what Mr. Furukawa says, since he seems probably to know more about this than I do. We could have better coordination of national and private authorities in essentially a kind of counter-espionage way. And then with respect to the laundering, the United States government is putting sanctions on these cryptocurrency laundering sites, where you basically take the cryptocurrency in and you do all these transactions so it's not possible to trace them, and then they go back out again. The problem for the United States, it's like the game that children play sometimes. They probably have it here in Japan as well. We call it whack-a-mole, where the mole jumps out and you hit it on the head, and then another mole jumps out, and you hit that one, another mole jumps out. And so trying to shut down these currency washing or cryptocurrency washing sites is like a game of whack-a-mole. If we could do that more effectively on a more multilateral basis, maybe that would have some effects as well. But I'd be very interested in Dr. Furukawa's response.
Okay, Dr. Furukawa.
Well, first of all, United Nations has not enforced any embargo against North Korea. When I was working for a UN panel of experts, I kept asking a question to my colleagues, Chinese and Russian colleagues, who kept saying that the sanctions are hurting the North Korean humanitarian aspect of North Korea's society and economy. UN sanction measures have been called as a target sanction measures. All measures are aligned with the efforts to terminate the flow of fund, people, goods, and technology related to North Korea's weapons of mass destruction, and also all military equipment. But UN target sanction measures have been miserably dysfunctional in curtailing those flows. But somehow, according to the argument by China and Russia, these UN target sanction measures have been so good at hurting the flow of rice or whatever humanitarian goods flowing to North Korea. It doesn't make any sense. There's a structural problem. Certainly, there's a problem about North Korea have been experiencing, especially in terms of the finance. The U.S. government unilateral financial sanction measures against North Korea have been so effective. But UN system, UN Security Council resolution provided an exemption for Russian banks to operate within the North Korea, so that they will be able to undertake humanitarian activities. The problem about this Russian bank was they are so expensive, aggressive in pursuit of profit. So UN organization ceased not to use this Russian bank. And eventually this Russian bank retreated from North Korea. It's everything is related to the structure or system, internal system of the North Korea's economy. Because it doesn't work, people just get out of this country one by one. We should never forget about these structural problems that is hampering North Korea's internal economy. The effective ways to effective sanction measures against China, against North Korea, as Marcus-san said, cyber attack, which is becoming an emerging industry of North Korea. This has to be more effectively regulated, and we rely quite heavily on the investigation or work by the U.S. government or U.S. security, the information security companies. But we need more in-depth international cooperation. The cyber incidents cut across the border. There are many victims across the world. But somehow it's always the U.S. government that is taking a lead in investigation. And about U.S. government to internal resources is limited. So why not the other government? And I think Japanese government should be more active in leading, joining, and also even leading some of the cyber incidents, especially because there are folks based in Japan who are involved in their as a main player, main culprits, main suspect of some of the major cyber incident. And also, we need more sanction against the North Korea's partners based in China and Russia. The U.S. government and also supported by Japan, the South Korean government, have been sanctioning companies and individuals based in China and Russia occasionally, but we need to do more, especially given the most recent visit by the North Korea's delegation to Russia. The delegation's visit itself is a grave violation of UN sanction measures. There was at least 4 or 5 people who are on the UN sanction list. They were not supposed to travel outside of North Korea, but Russia accepted them without asking for the approval for exemption to the exemption from the Security Council. Russia also ignored its obligations under the UN Security Council resolution to prohibit the entry of all staff members of the entities sanctioned by UN Security Council, including the Munition Industry Department or National Aerospace Development Agency or a few others. Providing advice or any information related to the launch using ballistic missile technology or rocket. Also, fighter jet or naval vessels. It's also clear violation of the very basic UN sanction measures. All these issues are great violations. People, especially Russian government, they don't quite understand that. They seem to believe that they have the final say about whether Russia may allow more sanction measures or not. The thing is, we don't need any more new Security Council resolution. The existing resolutions provide sufficient legal grounds for all UN member states to sanction the violators. It is the obligations of all UN member states to enforce financial sanctions, prohibition of transactions, or travel ban against anyone who violated sanctions. The so-called unilateral sanction is an obligation under the UN Security Council resolutions. So I'd like to call on US government, Japanese government, South Korean government, and EU countries to actually persuade other UN member states to fulfill their obligation. Do not let Russian military folks, Ministry of Defense officials, or President's office to travel abroad, because it would constitute a violation. So the question about sanction is now the determination of the political will of each member state. Are they really serious to do so, to perform their obligations? If so, they already have sufficient legal measures in the existing resolution. Sorry for my long explanation.
Well, thank you very much for very important points that both Dr. Nolan and Dr. Furukawa made. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I'm sure we'd like to hear more discussions on very important topic, but I just have to say that we'll finish this very important and very interesting session. Before I do that, I'd like to ask Dr. Nolan for the last words, if you like to make.
Sure. In the nuclear field, you often hear the phrase nuclear breakout when some country decides to leave the non-proliferation regime and start building nuclear weapons. Well, I think what we've observed in Dr. Furukawa's comments is Russia kind of having a UN breakout, where they will no longer, they just run roughshod over UN rules and will no longer abide by them. I'm not sure how much better China is either. So I think the challenge we face now is we have an unfortunate humanitarian situation in North Korea. We have a external kind of strategic tensions with North Korea, and we have an international environment that is not very supportive of collective action. And so I think that Dr. Furukawa had it right at the end, which is we need to really strengthen multilateral cooperation as much as we can to try to contain the damage that Russia is doing and that potentially China will do to a system that will try to keep North Korea under some kind of constraint with its nuclear ambitions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nolan, for very good last words. And we understand the importance of increasing or intensifying international cooperation to deal with not only North Korea issue, but also like a Russia-Ukraine issue. So I think this is a message that I received from the discussion. And I thank you very much for your participation in our special seminar today, audience, and of course, Dr. Nolan and Dr. Furukawa. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.